They called it a conversation, but the room was already arranged like a verdict. Celine Hart, behind her glassy desk. Heather, from HR, angled near the door like a lighthouse that only blinked exit. Thursday morning. The office still smelled faintly of wet fleece and fresh coffee. "We need fresh perspectives for our next launch," Celine said, each word polished, frictionless. "Someone in tune with current market trends." I watched her hands as she spoke, immaculate nails that had never scraped granite or stuck in frozen paracord. Heather folded her tablet like a hymn book. I didn't argue. Maybe that surprised them. 7 years is a long time to spend teaching a brand how to carry weight. Pathfinder was mine, the pack that settled into your frame so well you forgot you were hauling a week of food. The modular jacket system too. 2 awards for solving the simple problem of mornings that begin at 32 degrees and afternoons that lose their breath in sunlight. "Your work lacks the innovation we need moving forward," Celine added, sliding papers toward me. "A ceremony of signatures." I signed where the flags told me to sign. There's a moment, when a canoe leaves the bank, when the keel stops grinding and the hull is only water and decision. I felt that moment standing there. Not loss. Not yet. Just lift. I thanked them. Courteous vowels. Old habit. Then I unplugged my tablet, slid my sketchbooks into the canvas satchel that still smelled like pine sap from a field test in Ely, and walked out past the conference room where last winter's prototypes still leaned like quiet witnesses. In the elevator's mirror, I looked like myself, only lighter, as if some weight had finally admitted it belonged elsewhere. What Celine didn't see, what no one at Arcform cared to ask, was what lived in that satchel. A private portfolio. 12 collections I'd drawn on my time, not theirs, the ones she'd waved off as off-brand or too niche for our demographic. Designs built around problems that don't trend. Saturated shoulder straps that dry in half an hour, buckles that can be pinched with numb fingers, an outer shell that sheds sleet without sounding like a plastic grocery bag. I carried them home the way you carry a small fire inside your coat. In the parking lot, my phone buzzed. Nate Ellis. This place just made the biggest mistake of its corporate life. I smiled without showing teeth. Maybe, maybe not. Mistakes are funny things. Sometimes they're just the name we give to the door that should have been opened sooner. The air outside was late winter wet, Minneapolis gray. I stood for a beat under it, not ready to start the engine. I thought of the old shop in Duluth, my grandfather sanding ribs smooth until the grain felt like water running uphill. "Function first," he'd say, "and form will catch up like a dog that loves you." I put the satchel on the passenger seat, buckled it in, then I pulled away, already drafting the next thing I would not apologize for. I learned to see with my hands before I learned the language for it. In my grandfather's shop in Duluth, the air always held a low sweet note: cedar ribs, linseed oil, a faint breath of the lake drifting up the hill. He'd set a half-shaped thwart in my palms and say, "Close your eyes, tell me where it snags." I'd run my fingers along the curve and find the place where function hadn't finished speaking. That was our grammar. Remove what doesn't help. Strengthen what carries the load. Let the water decide the rest. Function sculpts form. The canoe didn't try to be beautiful. It became beautiful doing its job. I carried that stubborn simplicity into design school, where critique walls tilted toward theatrics. People clapped for ideas that photographed well, but collapsed under a fingertip. I didn't clap much. I tested buckles with cold packs and poured sleet from a Pyrex cup onto shell fabrics in a bathtub. When Arcform called, they weren't a dream, just a puzzle worth solving. Good gear trapped under bad decisions. Zippers placed where rain pooled. Foam densities that bruised hips. A logo the size of a confession. I took the job because the problems were honest. Harold Pike ran the place then. He had trail dust in the seams of his boots and a way of listening that felt like permission. "Make it work first," he told me on day one. "Then make it beautiful. The people who use our gear will do the marketing for us." We rebuilt quietly, shifted weight, rethought seams. Put a little more curve into the frame sheet and a little less ego into the colorways. Sales doubled in 3 years, not because of a miracle, but because hikers stopped thinking about our gear at mile 12. Silence is the loudest endorsement in the backcountry. Then the page turned. Harold retired, and Dana Voss arrived with a mandate to elevate. She hired Celine to polish the brand until it could see its own reflection. Meetings moved from field notes to mood boards, from stitch tension to trend reports. We started saying palette more than payload. The newer designers were talented in ways that made investors smile: cinematic renders, glossy decks, a command of light leaks, and lens flares. But when I asked how a shoulder strap would vent under a 35-pound load on a humid ascent, I'd get a shrug and a screenshot. I kept bringing prototypes that breathed and carried and kept quiet in the rain. Celine kept asking for something that sparks on the grid. We were both telling the truth from different altitudes. I stood where the trail tilts and bites. She hovered where the campaign gleams. For a while, I thought the two could meet in the middle. For a while, they did, until the day the room filled with perfume instead of nylon, and no one remembered why we'd started. That's the thing about a canoe, my grandfather would say. You can polish it all day, but if the keel line's wrong, the river files a complaint. The first snow that winter was a whisper, not a storm. I stayed late, alone with the hum of the prototype lab, and pinned my weatherproof system on the wall in 6 quiet panels. Not a spectacle, just a sequence. Microclimate mapping, where heat rises and where it flees. Seam architecture that dodges stress, like a fox slipping fences. A laminate that bends without creasing its integrity. Hardware you can work with gloves that have already soaked through. I tape notes next to each board, small field-made sentences. Shed sleet at 15 degrees tilt. Vents open from the bottom to keep rain out. Buckle profile slimmer. Won't bite the hip bone. The kind of writing that only makes sense after a long climb and a short breath. In the review, Celine didn't sit. She floated, eyes skimming like she was scrolling an invisible feed. "It's competent," she said finally, "but not compelled. Where's the spark?" She tapped the board that mapped moisture load across the back panel. "This is technical, the way someone might say basement." Around the table, a few of the new designers were kind, or practiced at looking kind. I watched Aiden Frost tilt his head, catching the reflection of the screen in his eyes. "Maybe we lean into a bolder silhouette," he offered. "Shorthand for future." I nodded, wrote down her notes, and added a box on my page called Spark, then underlined it twice, as if the underlines could summon something I didn't believe in. When the meeting ended, I rolled my boards carefully, like maps you're not done walking, and carried them back to my station. A week later, the executive deck went up on the shared drive. Fall, vision, elevate. I opened it out of duty, not hope, and felt the air thin around me. There they were, my sequence, rearranged, my language, lacquered, the same vent logic described as breath choreography, the same seam dodge, renamed kinetic contouring. The centerpiece mocked up in a colorway I'd never signed off on, credited lead designer Aiden Frost. I read the slides twice the way you read a diagnosis, then shut my laptop and counted to 30 with my hands flat on the table until my pulse came back from its sprint. I called Evan Park from the parking lot, where the snow had turned to a gray slurry that looked like it regretted falling. We used to share coffee at trade shows and steal each other's fabric swatches, laughing like thieves who only took what the other wanted to lose. "You free?" I asked. "For you, always," he said. I told him everything. The slow burn kind of theft that starts with language and ends with names. He listened the way engineers listen, quiet, then precise. "Non-compete?" he asked. "None," I said. "Harold hated them." Evan exhaled. "Then you're a free river." We sat with that for a moment. Somewhere, a plow scraped a curb. "Look," he added, voice sharpening. If you ever want to show work to someone who still measures with rain and not with buzz, call me. Or better call Lauren. It is not no. I looked at the lab windows glowing upstairs. The life I'd tried to keep true under different weather. I might, I said. Soon. Lauren Whitaker didn't waste syllables. The email landed at 6:41 a.m. Subject line, bare as a ridge. Bring your terms. 10 o'clock. I stared at it long enough to feel the coffee cool in my hand, then opened the folder I'd been building for months and began trimming. Not the ideas, those were bone. I sharpened the faces they'd wear, cleaner call-outs, field photos that smelled like weather, small animations where a vent lifted and fell like a lung, 6 boards, each devoted to a problem a person could name after a bad day outside. Heat that puddles between shoulder blades, wet straps that never come back, a hip belt that argues with your bones, shells that turn you into a drum in sleet. I left the marketing empty and let the math stand up straight. By 9 I'd exported everything, tucked my sketchbooks into the satchel, and pulled on the jacket that knows me, frayed cuffs, map stain on the right pocket, the zipper that stutters before it sings. Minneapolis was thawing. Light came loose from the clouds and slid along the streets. I parked 2 blocks from Ridgeline's brick building because I needed the walk. The receptionist had a nose ring and the kind of smile you learn from long days. Not performance, recognition. She waved me through to a space that felt like a workshop first and an office second. Racks of half-born packs stood along the wall like colts. Bolts of fabric leaned at angles that said someone had touched them 5 minutes ago. The air carried adhesive and nylon and a faint, friendlier note T, maybe. Lauren rose as I entered. No preamble, no choreography. Her hair was pulled back the way people do when they've chosen clarity. Evan says your work solves problems we've been chasing, she said, tapping the corkboard where my files already lived, printed and pinned. Seeing them, there felt like watching your handwriting read aloud in a stranger's voice, known, but changed by the room. She stepped closer to the panel I thought of as the heart of the system, modular weatherproofing that stacked protection without trapping heat, pieces that understood they were better together but still carried their own weight. She touched the edge of the diagram like it might run if you pushed too hard. This one, she said, we've kept bumping into it and you've drawn the door. We sat. She listened, like Harold used to listen, eyes on the work, not the picture of herself looking at the work. I talked through stitch paths and failure modes, the way we could bias the laminate so it bent with the body instead of asking the body to negotiate. She nodded at the right places, cut through the fluff I hadn't brought, asked only one question that mattered. How soon can you start? I'm available now, I said, feeling the words click into some inner gear. Good, she answered. Then we'll move fast, very fast. There was no handshake photo, no speech, just a calendar invite that appeared on my phone before I reached the door, and a sensation, rare and quiet, that the river had found great again. The first week at Ridgeline felt like stepping from carpet back onto rock. Meetings happened at workbenches. Ideas were measured with calipers, not applause. I spent mornings translating my sketches into parts lists, and afternoons walking the floor with engineers who spoke in tolerances and failure rates. Somewhere between the stitch lab and the heat press, my phone buzzed. Marco Ruiz. He didn't waste time. Off the record, he said, voice lowered like a weather report you wish was wrong. Aiden's renders? Pretty, but the prototypes are 2 pounds heavy across sizes, and the frame sheet kinks under torque. Materials aren't doing what the deck promised. I leaned against a rack of uncut webbing. You'll sort it, I said, though we both knew sorting requires a true starting point. Marco exhaled. Celine's telling leadership you left without proper documentation, that you walked out and sabotaged the transition. My breath came shallow for a beat. I had spent the last month before I left packing 7 years into neat folders. Spec trees, bombs, vendor notes, even the stupid shortcuts to the stitch settings on machines we named like pets. I'd trained Aiden on my pipeline while he scrolled his phone under the table. That's a lie, I said. and heard how flat it sounded. I know. But lies wear suits in our building these days, Marco said. Watch your back, and watching Zapting with the mattercase. I thanked him and hung up, the click small as a dropped screw, then emailed Dana Voss. We met the next morning in a cafe that smelled like oranges and steam. She arrived 10 minutes late and already halfway gone. I've heard Celine is suggesting I left your team without documentation, I began. Dana's smile was professional and undecided. Celine mentioned you might be defensive. She folded her hands with the neatness of a policy. Ty Mason, the industry is small. Discretion protects everyone. The subtext was tidy. Stay quiet, and maybe you'll keep your name. I sipped the burnt coffee and kept my voice even. Discretion is easier when people tell the truth. Every file is organized in your shared drive. Aiden sat in on my process walkthroughs, twice. Dana nodded like she was filing the gesture, not the facts. We'll manage our challenges internally. I'd hate to see your reputation tangled in unpleasantness. We parted in a draft of cold air. By afternoon, a certified letter found my mailbox. ARC Forms Legal, reviewing potential confidentiality concerns from my employment. Careful wording, no teeth, all shadow. I walked it down the hall to Ridgeline Legal, where a woman with a tired bun and bright eyes read it once and smiled as if someone had tried to bluff with a 4. Standard intimidation, she said. Do you have dates on those rejected concepts? Every one, I said, and slid a folder across. Timestamps, meeting notes. The email where Celine called the system off-brand. Our counsel's reply was 3 paragraphs long and surgical. It invited ArcForm to compare my archived submissions against their current timelines. It welcomed a court's curiosity. It implied nothing, proved everything. 2 quiet days followed. Then Marco again. Whatever you did, legal looked like they saw a ghost. I told him I'd done nothing new, only stacked the truth where a judge could reach it. He sighed. Keep moving, he said. She won't stop. That is not the Saev. I looked across Ridgeline's floor where people were building, not posturing, and felt the ground hold steady. Neither will I said. Evan chose a burger place with cracked vinyl booths and a milkshake machine that sounded like an old outboard. We sat in a back corner under a photo of a walleye nobody believed. He slid his tablet across the table without preamble, the screen already bright. You should see this, he said, and I knew by his voice that I already had just not like this. ArcForm's internal brief, FALL, elevation, opened to a page I could have drawn with my eyes closed. The mock-ups borrowed my sequence and my order of care. Heat mapping turned into glossy gradients. Vent logic turned into arrows with fashionable verbs. Even the stitch migration I'd tested on a weighted mannequin now paraded as proprietary flow. Lead designer, Aiden Frost. The captions read like a translation of a translation. The meaning had survived, but the soul had been sanded off. I scrolled until my chest went quiet. So that's the plan, Evan said, softer now. Full push, September. Materials already in purchase orders. For a moment, I watched the waitress refill someone's coffee and thought about my grandfather handing me sandpaper like a compass. She rejected them, I said, not to argue but to mark the fact aloud. Called them uninspired. Evan nodded. Sometimes theft isn't taking. It's keeping what you wouldn't credit. He tapped to another deck. Ridgelines. A schedule Lauren had negotiated in pen, not PowerPoint. If you say yes, we can have your line in stores by August, with your name on the hang tags, royalties per unit, attribution in every catalog. The word royalties landed like a small mercy I hadn't known to ask for. Not payment for a moment, but a share in the consequence of good work. You're sure your board will move that fast? I asked. He smiled without triumph. Lauren convinced the CEO before she pinged you. We've been building lanes. We just needed a vehicle that can actually drive. I didn't dramatic pause. I didn't make a speech about integrity. I looked at the calendar inside my head, the one that holds seasons, not quarters, and felt the line settle. Yes, I said, let's do it. By afternoon, I was in Lauren's office with a contract that read like someone had listened closely. Royalties. Creative control over final production specifications. A clause that put my name in marketing not as garnish but as authorship. No non-compete ghosts, no trapdoors hidden in adjectives. I signed with a steady hand and a small private grief for all the years I'd written my name only on the back of things. Then I opened my archive and set the work on the table. Not just concepts, but the bones beneath them. Bombs down to the gram, vendor notes from mills in Osaka and Taichung, tolerances that kept seams from wandering, lamination temps with failure margins, assembly guides with photos of hands in frame, because hands teach better than arrows. Lauren didn't promise fireworks. She called Priya in from the floor and said, "We're doing this, fast. Make a swear jar for shortcuts." That night, a new email found my personal inbox. Celine, perhaps we could explore a consulting arrangement. I let the words sit until their perfume faded, then deleted them with the same gentle certainty you use to cut a frayed thread clean. The river steepened. We leaned forward. We began. Factories have their own weather. Ridgelines ran warm and metallic, a front of heat from the seam sealers rolling across the cooler aisles where bolts of fabric stood like quiet trees. Priya Nair met me at the door with a clipboard and the expression of someone who has cut through 100 tangles before breakfast. "Your system is clever," she said. "No flattery in it, only measurement. It's also a hydra. We'll need to cauterize the heads as they sprout." We started with the laminate. On paper, the bias let the panels bend with the body. On the table, our first sheet puckered like it remembered being flat. We tweaked resin ratios, shifted layup angles by 2 degrees, ran the press again. Better. Then the microvents beautiful in the CAD, fussy in the jig. I suggested longer slots. Priya shook her head. Longer leaks. Widen the ribs instead. We argued for 7 minutes, counted failures for 2 hours, landed on her ribs and my spacing, a truce that felt like design always should, earned, not imposed. The days lengthened until they forgot their ends. I kept a small notebook in my pocket and wrote only what the line taught us. Tape curls at 64 degrees Celsius. Heel cup pulls 1-2 millimeters after cool down. Hip belt foam recovers best if we rest it 48 hours before stitch. I slept twice on a narrow cot in the office because the rain tests wouldn't wait for morning. At 2:13 a.m., under the drum of the chamber, our shell finally stopped sounding like a grocery bag and started sounding like weather, soft, directional, unwilling to brag. Priya looked over, eyes rimmed in red. "There," she said. "Now it's a tool." Email still found me in the seams between tasks. Dana's latest was cordial and edged. "We should discuss your current activities for your long-term professional future." I read it under the humming light of the QA station and forwarded it to legal with 2 words: ongoing intimidation. Ridgeline's counsel replied with a sentence that felt like a hand on my shoulder. "We've got it. Keep building." By the end of week 2, prototypes lined the wall like a small, expectant choir. The modular pack nested cleanly, the shell shrugged off sleet without trapping heat, the adaptive boot flexed, where feet ask and refused where rocks demand. We sent 5 full kits to partner retailers who don't speak in exclamation points. They called back using the kindest language our trade knows. Field ready, repeatable, no drama. Whispers began where they always do buyers' texts. Forum threads with usernames I recognize by gait alone. Someone posted a fuzzy photo of the hip belt on a trailhead sign. Someone else replied with a theory about our vent logic that was wrong in a flattering way. Lauren brought me into a marketing meeting and let me say the unfancy truth. Talk about what it does, not what it promises. Let silence be part of the story. On the floor that afternoon, Priya handed me a finished shell, the first one we both trusted. I slipped it on, rolled a shoulder, felt it settle. It didn't sparkle. It worked. The room smelled like nylon and earned relief. August is real, she said. I nodded. Let's make it inevitable. On launch day, I woke before the alarm, the room blue and undecided. I made coffee, couldn't taste it, pulled on the shell that had spent more nights in the rain chamber than I had in my own bed. The city was a hush of early trucks and distant trains. I drove to the trail I use when I need to remember why any of this exists, an easy climb to a low ridge where you can watch weather make up its mind. Fog combed the pines in slow strokes. The path underfoot was a braid of thaw and frost. Halfway up, my phone buzzed in a stubborn, insistent rhythm. Lauren, we're live. Site's already straining. A second ping. First orders stacking faster than the queue can page. I stopped among the birch, thumbed the screen, saw the page I'd stared at in comps now breathing in the world. Summit Series. The photos didn't shout. They showed hands. They showed wet rock. A hip belt that didn't argue. A shell that didn't announce itself when the rain began. I kept climbing until the trees thinned and the city unrolled like a map that had finally been flattened. Up there, wind found me. Cold, clean, exactly the kind we'd tuned for. The vents did what vents should, opened at the low points. Kept the rain where it belonged. My pockets held only a folded paper towel and a promise to myself. Remember the people who will shoulder this in weather you don't see from a desk. Another vibration. Site crashed for 3 minutes. Back now. Retailers calling for increases. Then texts from numbers I didn't recognize. Reviewers. A journalist with boots in his avatar. Words like clean, quiet, solved kept threading the messages. I let them pass through me with gratitude and a small guard against believing anything too quickly. By the time I hiked down, my notifications had become a chorus. Marco's name cut through. Familiar, I answered. He didn't bother with hello. They saw the preview catalog. Dana's spinning hard. Celine is... He paused, searching, rattled. She's telling leadership Ridgeline stole from us. It is fire end. I stood at the trailhead sign and watched a pair of runners laugh into the cold. Truth has a timestamp, I said. So do my emails. That's what scares them, Marco said, and the line softened. It's good work, Mason. Back at the car, a voicemail waited. Dana, this is unacceptable, she began, voice clipped into compliance. You've deliberately undermined ARC form. I sat with it a moment, then called back, kept my tone level. I designed products for the people who need them, I said. You're selling versions of those products under someone else's name. We'll explore legal options, she said, a script wearing human clothes. That would be instructive, I answered. We can start with the email, where Celine called these designs off-brand 6 months ago. Silence traveled the wire. For a second, I thought of Harold and his boots, of cedar ribs and lake light. You should have valued what you had, I said, not unkindly. Good luck with your launch. I ended the call, set the phone face down on the passenger seat, and watched a low sun decide to be brave. Vindication felt quieter than I'd imagined, more like a steady breath you'd been holding for years, finally leaving the body. The market speaks in receipts and returns, but also in the weather of conversations. In the week after launch, the air around Ridgeline changed pressure. Customer service phones sang without panic. The notes were bright, surprised retail partners, upping orders, not begging for concessions. The web team wore the tired smiles of marathoners who can still feel their legs. Lauren walked the floor with a hand around a mug and the measured calm of someone steering rather than chasing. By Friday, the first full reviews landed, not fireworks field notes with mud on them. Carries like it learned your back, one tester wrote. Another called the shell, confidently quiet, the kind of praise that never trends but always lasts. Photos showed drizzle beating and rolling off, a boot flexing at the right crease, a hip belt bone soft where bones complain. I read them alone at my desk and had the odd urge to send each writer a thermos and a dry pair of socks. Then the industry did what industries do. It compared. Outside ran a feature that set our summit pieces beside leaked images of Arcform's elevation line. The headline wore a grin I could hear. Separated at birth, the article never said, stolen. It didn't need to. It laid out the timeline. It noted my name in our catalog, and Aiden's on theirs. It asked questions that make boardrooms feel like ice water. Forums filled with side-by-sides. Field reps whispered dates into DMs. None of it belonged to me anymore. It belonged to the work and the record. Arcform blinked. A press release arrived mid-week. Elevation postponed for additional refinement. The phrasing was polite and vaguely medical, like a knee that needs rest before the summit. Analysts read the line the way you read a skyline, a retreat. Their stock slid 8% over the next quarter. I didn't gloat. Gloating's a poor use of daylight. But I did breathe a little deeper. At Ridgeline, the numbers stopped being abstract. First quarter results outpaced every launch the company had on record. Accounting sent me a note about royalties with a figure that made me sit down, not for its reach, but for what it represented. A share in the distance, traveled after the drawing ends. Lauren called me into a small room that still smelled like fresh drywall and offered me the design director role. Not for politics, she said, for stewardship. 6 designers would report in. I would set the next 3 seasons' compass. I said yes with a gratitude I didn't dress up. Evan moved out of materials and across the hall into our team as technical advisor. He brought with him an unshowy brilliance and a box of fabric samples, organized by how they behave when wet, which is to say, truthfully. We pinned a new board with a heading that wasn't a slogan, just a promise. Solve what hurts. Arcform eventually shipped a reworked line, scrubbed of the features that had once made it familiar to me. The reviews were kind without conviction, polite hands clapping in an empty room. I closed the tab and walked the floor, where Priya was fine-tuning a jig. We talked about a mill in Osaka, about seam creep at high humidity, about winter. The market had answered. It hadn't shouted. It had nodded once, decisively, and moved on. That was enough. Done. Denver in winter smells like metal and altitude. The industry conference was all bright badges and practiced banter, the carpet a tired map of places we'd already been. I stood near a display of avalanche beacons, answering questions that were really compliments in disguise, when I saw Celine at the bar. Alone, a cocktail sweating in her hand. She caught my eye and lifted the glass, the way people do when they want to borrow your time. "Congratulations," she said when I stepped close enough to hear without shouting. No warmth, no teeth. The word rested on the counter like a coin we both knew was the wrong currency. "Thank you," I said. "You could have stayed," she added, turning the glass. "Fought for your designs." I thought of the years I'd fought politely, persistently, until the fight became the job, and the job forgot the trail. "Some places don't deserve the fight," I said. It landed between us with the quiet weight of something chosen. She flinched, recovered, studied the room, as if it might suggest a better line. "Dana's stepping down," she offered. "Board asked me to serve as interim." I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "Good luck," I said, and meant it. The field needs more than one strong outfitter if the mountains are going to be properly met. Spring turned, and the mail brought a box that wasn't on any tracking app. Brown paper. Marco's handwriting like trail notes. Inside, my old sketchbooks. The covers worn soft by years of hands and weather. A folded note on top. "These belong with their maker. Elena's gone. Thought you'd want to know." I sat at the kitchen table and opened to a page I'd nearly forgotten, pencil lines of a modular storm tent, ribs arcing like the inside of a seashell, joints designed to flex rather than fight. I had never shown it to her. Maybe I was saving it for when I needed to remember who I was without a room telling me. I carried the book to the office the next morning. "Winter," I told Lauren, laying it open on the table. Evan leaned in, already smiling in the way engineers do when a problem looks like an invitation. Priya walked over with a ruler she didn't use, measuring instead with her eyes. We began speaking in winters, wind loads, snow creep, fabric memory, the math of a long night when the stakes are not a marketing calendar but a life you love enough to protect. By summer, Ridgeline's stock had doubled. Analysts made charts that forgot the taste of sleet. Arcform announced restructuring under new leadership. Someone forwarded me the press release. I didn't read past the first line. There was a prototype on my bench that needed a quieter zipper and a faster pitch, and the day was too fine to spend indoors. Sometimes, late, I still think about the old office, about blueprints, taped to the wall and coffee that tasted like hurried decisions. Not with bitterness, now clarity instead. They taught me something I didn't know I needed. That work cannot carry its own truth if it's always apologizing for it. Celine tried to quiet mine and ended up amplifying it until the echo reached the ridge I was standing on. The best revenge was never a burn. It was a shelter that doesn't flap when the wind comes hard. It was a pack that forgets itself and lets a person notice the sky. Design, at its best, is a promise kept in bad weather. That's the whole art. That's what endures.